Hello, hello, everybody. My name is Max Rich. I want to welcome you to this first webcast that we're doing. This one is all about classic rock and basically how to achieve it as a guitar player. So, or how to achieve that sound, rather. I want to give a few minutes, let everyone kind of shuffle in. There are a lot of people registered, so we want to make sure we give everyone enough time to get on in. So if people want to leave any comments or anything, introduce themselves, say where we're from, get yourself initiated a little bit, go right ahead, because a bit later in the segment we're going to be doing a question and answer thing. So if I remember your name, I might end up subconsciously picking your question. So go ahead, leave some comments, and we'll get started in a couple minutes. So let's see if anyone has left anything yet. All right. Well, we've got Bob Sterling from Charleston, South Carolina. Nice to see you, Bob. I hope you're seeing me. And of course, we've got Jules and Diana as well in here, and Paul, by the looks of it. Great to see all you guys in on the webcast. I hope you guys got your guitars tuned up. We're going to be doing classic rock, and we're actually I want to make sure that you guys are aware, no matter what kind of stuff we're covering today in this lesson, we're all going to be in standard tuning. So just regular standard old tuning. So we might cover stuff that originally on the record was played a half step down. But we're going to go ahead and do everything in standard tuning to keep it easy for you. So if you guys are ready, make sure you got your guitars all set up, and we'll get going in just 1 minute. All right, so I want to, I guess I want to start this segment off about classic rock saying, basically, classic rock is sort of, at least in my viewpoint, classic rock kind of stems from like the 60s to the 80s at some point in the 80s. 90s, it got a little not so classic. But between the 60s and the 80s, there were a ton of amazing bands and really, really good players that came through that sort of all had like a basis in the blues and like really early rock. And you think of like the blues and early blues or early electric guitar based blues, you think maybe like, John Lee Hooker, Muddy Waters, or something like this. So, guys like the Stones and, a bunch of other, Jimi Hendrix and a bunch of other guitar players were heavily, heavily influenced by these blues guys. And they kind of ended up using the gear of their day, which turned out to be Marshalls and Fenders. And, if you're playing a club or if you're playing a big venue, you got to turn it way up, and you sort of naturally get a really crunchy, distorted sound out of an amplifier that's cranked, a tube amplifier especially. So that combination mixed with like the blues roots sort of kind of gave birth to the classic rock movement, I guess, or the classic rock genre. So when we're talking about classic rock, it's really important to talk about tone, because tone is a huge factor in guitar playing. Whether you're playing clean or crunchy. You want to make sure that you can kind of span both sides of the spectrum a little bit. Before I want to continue, I just want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. I played a little bit, make sure everyone can hear me. If someone can just chime in and let me know that that they're listening and that the sound is okay, or if it's not, let me know and I'll definitely fix it. Just give me a heads up. All right, so basically tone, when we're talking about classic rock, is always a little bit crunchy, and generally speaking, a lot of the guys use like humbucker guitars, where you've got like kind of a wider pickup, Hendrix and, David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, and some other guys played Strats, but, for like the heavier hard rock stuff, classic rock, a Les Paul was really common. So if you have one, take that bad boy out, because we're probably going to be needing it. But As far as clean tone goes, a really heavily overlooked aspect of it is reverb. And that's the, you know, most amps nowadays, especially if they're like digital amps or solid state amps, they have a built-in reverb. And if you got one, turn it on. If not, you know, if you got a tube amplifier, maybe you need an extra reverb pedal or something. It's what I use on my amp, one of them. And you want to kind of saturate it a lot because you don't want a dry sound. Dry sound is great for like country and stuff, but not so good for the blues and for classic rock because we need notes that really sing. So when you're playing a note, you can get this like that kind of a sound, right? And that's really important to be able to have notes ringing, whether it's crunchy or not. You want to make sure that you got a fat, thick tone, and reverb helps thicken that up. And then with distortion, you don't want to have like a crazy high modern gain sound because that wasn't around at the time. If you're trying to emulate classic rock players, you want to make sure that you have a smooth, sort of like creamy distortion or crunch, you know, Marshall-esque, if you will. Me personally, right now, I'm using a Providence Red Rock overdrive to kind of get that sound, and it's more of an overdrive than it is a distortion, and it sounds pretty nice. And you could get kind of that fat, almost Aerosmith type sound. But that's basically like one main sector. The other sector, of course, would be wah and phaser and stuff like this. And we'll get into this in a little bit. But I want to start by saying, you know, no matter what you're playing, as far as classic rock is concerned, whether you're playing Angus Young or Jimi Hendrix or Jimmy Page, like a super key part of what you do is based on vibrato. You know, so one thing. All these guys listen to B.B. King because back then B.B. King was the man on guitar. And he's always been the man on guitar, especially blues guitar. But he had a very specific vibrato, and it's not an easily achievable vibrato. And what I mean by that is that he doesn't do like a vibrato, you know, like a rock style, kind of like that. You know, he always wanted to mimic slide players because he grew up in the South in Mississippi and everyone around him played slides. So he developed this like really shaky, really wild vibrato sound. And if you couple that with some crunch, instead of this, you end up with this. Really kind of shaky, which has a great effect. You know, and you can get this really tense, sort of like shaky atmosphere out of a chord or out of a note. And the way you do that, it's a really key tool for like any aspiring classic rock guitarist. It's pretty much always done with your first finger, and what you do is you don't fret it vertically up and down like this. You want to fret it at an angle, right? Like this, and then make sure that the outside portion of your finger is pressed up against the fretboard. And then you see how my thumb is up top here? My thumb and my hand and my fingers expand and they kind of fan back and forth. It's like that type of emotion, right? Like that. And feel free if you're not, you know, if something's like way over your head or something while I'm talking, make sure you just type it in. Let me know, you know, oh, hey, man, you know, like, I don't know what a major 7 sharp 11 chord is or something, you know. I'm not going to be talking about that stuff, but, you know, in case something's over your head, just chime in, you know. Feel free to do so. So anyway, we are working on this type of vibrato. And with this type of vibrato, you want to make sure that you're kind of slapping, not slapping, but throwing your thumb from side to side. So you get a really fast, like fan-like approach, you know, kind of like if you were to take your hand and shake it back and forth like that. And you put some crunch on that. And so that's, I mean, that's just one type of vibrato. There's a bunch of different types, and they all have a different effect on your playing, but it's something that you should definitely try to approach in a well-rounded manner. You want to be able to do that vibrato just as well as you can do like, and have a soft, subtle one, or a really wide, you know, sweeping type of vibrato. They're all different musical effects. So when you're thinking about it, try to envision what you would do if you were singing that note, right? Very rarely, if you're a singer, would you do something like this, like, and just hold a note up there. You would probably, you know, bend it a little and use that vibrato. So if everyone is up to speed, then we can kind of take the segue from what I was just talking about with vibrato and include some bending, because bending, that's one of like the most important, by far, one of the most important classic rock techniques that you can have. And bending is so huge in the blues that it ended up becoming just as important in classic rock, maybe even more important. You've all heard this type of lick, right? It's like common in the blues, but if you speed it up, it's common in classic rock, right? You hear that all the time, whether it's Stevie Ray Vaughan or, you know, Jimmy Page or something, right? Everybody does that lick. And I'll show it to you. It's actually a really simple one. If we're in our pentatonic box, right? And everybody, I'm hoping everybody, if you're trying to play classic rock, you got to at least know the pentatonic box. So the G minor pentatonic box goes like that. And what we do, we take that note right there, the C, and we bend until it matches that note right there, the D. And you want to, it's basically like bending from here up to there. And, you know, giving vibrato at the top of a bend is a really common and super useful trick. Like that, right? And that is a huge component to how you kind of extract emotion out of the note. Because let's face it, I mean, there are a zillion guitar players, right? A ton of us. And if you want to stand out as a guitar player, being able to have your own voice and express yourself is paramount. You have to be able to do that if you want to stand out, or at least be mildly entertaining, right? You have to kind of inject your personality and emotion into the notes. And vibrato's like the fingerprint of a guitar player. You know, you listen to B.B. King, you know what kind of, you know, like that it's B.B. King just by listening from hearing his vibrato. Same with Eric Clapton. And so finding your own voice with your vibrato is really huge, because you can say so much with just a couple notes. You know, if you like, you know, vibrato is kind of what keeps the phrase going. You can hang out on a note, but if you do it without vibrato, it just sounds weird. Right, I even included vibrato on that last note just because I naturally do it. So don't overlook it. That vibrato plus bending is really important. And a good way to practice your bending is bend up to, like, if we're in the pentatonic box, take your third string with your third finger and bend and play this note, second string with your first finger at the same time. and bend until it sounds the same. And then you kind of eventually, you do that enough, you just know where that whole step is. And if you want to bend higher, like up to there, you got to kind of practice that one in the same fashion. You bend from here until it matches that note, and so on, you know. And it's really important because bending here is going to be different than bending here. The tension here is going to be a lot less than it is back here, so your whole step is not going to be quite as far. So it's important to practice bending like all over the neck, from here as well as here, you know. You know, and bending all the way up there. In fact, I think I might have gone a little bit out of tune. Give me 1 second. Let me just tune up. New strings, as it were, you know. I'm sure you guys are familiar, but new strings always going out of tune. All right. So make sure everyone is in and ready to go here. Okay, cool. So I want to now kind of indulge you and your curiosity maybe in a couple riffs that sort of help explain my position here and what I'm talking about with bending, vibrato, and pentatonics. But actually, before we go into this kind of next segment, I want to talk briefly about pentatonic stuff, because pentatonics make up like 90% of what classic rock guitar players play. With the exception of somebody like maybe Van Halen or somebody who has really out there type scales. Most guys are playing pentatonic stuff. That was all in the pentatonic scale and like the blues scale, which are basically the same thing. So if we're in the key of A minor, our pentatonic scale looks like that. But our blues scale has one added note. And there's only 5 notes in the pentatonic scale. Penta means 5, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if we're in A minor, it's A, C, D, E, and G, right? And between the D and the E is what's called the blue note. And that note is really kind of where a lot of tension and a lot of that typical classic rock sound comes from. Let me try it again. Right? It creates a ton of tension. And the same is said up here. You can do the exact same thing between D and E. You can do that here. So when you're going through your pentatonic scale, you add your middle finger there, and then keep going. And then you add your pinky there to get the other blue note. And that's kind of the basis for a ton of stuff. So now that we know that, we're going to kind of go into a really cool Led Zeppelin riff. Maybe you guys know it, maybe you don't. It's called Black Dog, or the song is called Black Dog. So the riff goes like this. Let me try that again here. Okay, so that riff is in A minor and just uses A minor pentatonic pretty much exclusively. So what we're doing, we're climbing up from this note, E, to the next string up, A. And we're just doing that kind of chromatically. We're doing the same ideas we did down here with the blue note, except he just does it on that string. It's the exact same idea. And then once we climb up to there, we drop back down to the E. And then we do the like really common classic rock thing where we take the first finger and we bend on the third string on the C, like down, like just a half step, not even really a half step, just to hint at a different note. And that's really common. That's where that emotion comes from, like I was talking about. Bending followed by vibrato. Right there. And then we're just still in the pentatonic box. Right there. So you've got and then we kind of climb down where we're climbing down our pentatonic. And then we drop down here for the C instead of playing here. Instead of doing that, we hit the same note, but back here. And then into our A power chord. So the whole thing sounds like that. And like I said, it's completely pentatonic, except for that one little like chromatic climb up. That's it. And the thing I want to kind of talk about with this lick is it does a couple things, right? Like I said, it kind of uses that bending with vibrato, but it also does that. And what we're doing, it's called a slur, where we just kind of hammer on from first finger to third finger and then pull off, but it happens quick. And another thing that happens all the time, and in fact is sort of a not so much of a technique as a playing style, and something that maybe you might have to adopt because it's not entirely natural to everyone. It wasn't entirely natural to me when I started, when I first started playing guitar. But the thing I'm talking about is playing with a lead finger, and that is sort of a concept that maybe people don't really think about so much, but it's really important. And what I mean is, when you're playing, no matter what you're playing, if you're playing right now, think about this and tell me what finger you feel is dominant while you're playing. You know, like what finger is the boss? Like, obviously, even if you're using all four, you're probably, without even realizing it, thinking of one when you're listening for pitches, you know, when you're like trying to like improvise a lick, you know. Something like that. What I was doing, my first finger is kind of the basis for the notes that I hear in my head. And because of that, I make my first finger a lot of the times the accented note. And that's exactly what's going on here. That note right there, that's the accented one. You can hear that. That kind of heaviness that is on that note, always the first finger. Notice how all of those start with the first finger. Right? So the accent, the heaviness of the phrase is built around the first finger. So I want to ask you guys, I want to take a second, and I want to kind of gather, if you can, like a survey. Tell me go ahead, type into the comment section what finger you feel is dominant. Take a second now and play some licks and kind of play something that happens naturally and see which finger you find dominant on your hand, and type in. Let me know. I'm just curious because a lot of my students, they come to me and they say, oh, you know, when I explain this concept to them, you don't really think about it until much later. And then you're like, oh, wow, I guess I am phrasing everything off of my ring finger. Like a lot of people will do, you know, and think and feel the heaviness in their ring finger. Some people do it in their pinky, and you know, it's different for everybody. So if anybody wrote anything in the comments, I'm kind of curious, you know, just to see where everybody's at here. Let's see here. All right. Well, nobody sharing their playing secrets. That's understandable. I don't blame you. You know, everyone wants to keep their secrets to themselves. But nevertheless, knowing what finger you find to be like the dominant one really affects your playing. You know, for example, another one that kind of shows this lick or shows this concept is Aerosmith, Joe Perry, right? Eat the Rich. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that song. It's an awesome song. It's a ripping one. But the riff goes like this. All right, now I'll break that down. What's going on? So right away, we're on our first finger. Starts with our first finger, followed by hammer on, and then first finger right there. Same thing, first finger. That's where the heaviness in the phrase is. And then now what we're doing, this is also in E, by the way, so it's not in A. But what we're doing, if you're kind of mapping out the E blues scale, if you don't know it yet, B flat is the blue note, which is right there. That's B flat. So if we go ahead and kind of think about this riff, that's the blue note. That's where that tension comes from. Right? But the first finger is the one controlling the action. That's the one that is hopping around. So you can tell that when he wrote that riff, he's feeling it in his first finger. And that's huge. That's really, really common in all of classic rock. If you think about whatever lick, you know, if you're in... I played all that based off of my first finger. You know, pretty much all of that I was hearing in my head the notes underneath my first finger. So let's just see real fast if anyone chimed in with their secrets. I'm curious. Any of you guys, let me know which finger you play. Index, all right. Third finger. There we go. Okay, so some people with their first finger, some people with their third finger. You know, it's different for everybody. But to those out there, like when I remember when I was playing, a lot of it was based off of my third finger. You know. Right, something like that, where I'm feeling the phrase in my third finger. It's important to be able to get that into your first finger. Different players have different styles, you know. If you listen to Larry Carlton, for example, he's a guy who might feel phrases a lot more heavily in his ring finger, or at least a lot of his solos that I've learned, that I've transcribed, give me that impression, you know. For example, a lick like that. That's a ring finger lick all the way, obviously. You know, something like that. You know, a lot of that is really heavily based on the ring finger. So that's one thing that is important to acknowledge. And kind of a way that you can go about approaching this first finger type of concept is sort of by playing with pentatonics in a way that you keep your first finger not always barred, but barred for a good portion of what you're doing, because a lot of these guys were blues based. That means they didn't have the like classical shred style technique. They had, you know, like some sleazy blues technique, you know, the way it's supposed to be when you're playing with the blues, which is why a lot of these guys play with their thumb wrapped around the top of the guitar, because they don't play with like a classical position, you know, maybe like Van Halen. If you watch Slash or something, he plays like this. With his thumb wrapped all the way on top. Jimi Hendrix played everything with his thumb wrapped on the top. Right? In order to get that really low note. So kind of getting that bar and trying to hear the notes. Like when you hear a note in your head and you're like, oh, that's the one I'm going for, practice it slowly enough so that you can envision getting there with your first finger instead of naturally with your ring finger, and vice versa. You know, you got to be versatile. But that's enough about this lead finger concept. I want to move on to another thing that happens all the time in classic rock, and that's the use of like open chords and using that with like a really crunchy sound and suspension and like tweaking one or two notes here or there, you know? For example, if you think of like You Shook Me All Night Long. Okay, now so the gain, right, makes it really saturated, and so you're not hearing everything crystal clear like you would if I played it like. You can hear each note a lot clearer. The other way, by using distortion or crunch, you know, overdrive, you're combining closed notes. In this case, I'm barring the third fret, first and second string, and I'm playing the next two strings open. So what I end up getting is like a G power chord. If you think of that, those notes, G, D, G, that's all that is. And this is just kind of like the reverse of that, D, G, D, G. And then all you're doing is adding your pinky to the 5th fret first string to get that extra, that little change in the sound. And that pedal tone, I'm just kind of keeping the beat steady on the D string. And then here, we shift from this to like a D sus4 chord, which is basically just a D chord, but you add your pinky to the first string. And then you pull off your pinky to the normal D chord. Like that. And that combination with distortion, open chords, you know, you hear it also all the time, like this is a really common lick or riff, you know, you can take this and use it however you want. But if like in this is the key of G. Right? What I'm doing there is is I'm playing like a G chord. It's super crunchy, right? So let me turn the crunch off so you can get it a little better. And what I'm doing then, I'm taking this G chord and I'm just kind of moving my two fingers down. And then I go from here, and my middle finger is now the bass note on the 5th string, and I drop the bass note then to my 1st finger on the 2nd fret. And then I go to an A power chord. So I end up with like a C, and then a G chord, and then an A chord. So you get, and you just put some crunch on that. I mean, tell me that's not classic rock sound, right? And you could do the same concept down here. Where I'm playing a G chord, and then I drop the G down to an F sharp. In this case, I grab it with my thumb. And then you can play a D chord with an F sharp in the bass. So you get, and then maybe an E minor, or you can even do like an E7, you know? Yeah, right? Something like that. Right? And using gain and open strings like that while you're playing is just huge, man. It changes your sound. It thickens up, fattens up your sound, you know, tremendously. Makes it so that you really have like a really fat amount of tone coming out. One last little one. Let's see if you guys know this one. Let's see, how's it go? Right, Paradise City, same thing. So what I'm doing, I'm playing basically just a G chord, and then keeping my pinky there, playing a C chord, and then keeping these two fingers there, and then hammering on for an F. And then going back to my G, right? And then let me just give you a little tasty bit of some lead playing before we go into the question and answer segment. So the rest of this, or the lead on this song, right? We'll teach that one. This is when you're playing in G, a really common thing is to use the relative minor pentatonic scale. So if you're in the key of G, you climb down like that. Down 3 half steps and you arrive at E. And that tells you what minor scale to use. Let me just make sure everyone is following here, because I don't want anyone getting lost, getting caught behind. But yeah, so that way, if you're playing a major key, like if we're in the key of G, you climb down 3 frets, and that gives you the minor scale. So in this case, we're going to be using the E minor pentatonic scale to play the lead stuff over G. So you can do the same thing. If you're in the key of C major, you climb down to the A. Now you use A minor pentatonic to play over C major. So if you're in, like I said, if you're in G, All right. So anyway, that lick, we're just in our E minor pentatonic, and we're on the 4th string, just climbing up, and then climb right back down with a pull off. And then we get this high note, this D right here on the 2nd string. We play that with our pinky, and then we bend the 3rd string, 14th fret. And then pull off. And then climb down. Right there. And notice how everything's based around that ring finger. Or I'm sorry, that 1st finger. And then this end section, we take the middle finger now on 13th fret, 2nd string, bend up a whole step to D, and then back to the 14th fret, 3rd string, bend, release, pull off, 14th fret, 4th string, and then back to that A with our ring finger, and bend. So, like that. So there's a ton of stuff, right? I mean, we could talk about classic rock forever. I mean, at least I could. I love the genre. And for most guys who like me, grew up listening to this stuff, that's what made me want to be a guitar player, was like playing classic rock stuff. So I'm sure you guys all have like a really similar love for this music. Otherwise, right, you wouldn't be here. But when you're trying to kind of emulate these great players, right? These guys who I've always looked up to, and I'm sure you probably have always looked up to. There are a few simple concepts, right? The 1st finger idea, making sure that you kind of feel the heaviness and the accented kind of weight of the phrase off of your 1st finger, and using bending and vibrato, man. I cannot stress that enough. And it's not something that's going to happen, maybe like the very first time you try it, right? You have to sort of find your voice, right? You have to find what works for you. It's like, sort of like you gotta, if you go to a new country, right, somewhere you've never been, if you go to, I don't know, India, or if you go somewhere like this, you're probably not going to find your favorite food, but I guarantee you, if you look hard enough, you'll find something you like. And it just takes a while. It's a process to find what you're looking for. And it's the same thing with vibrato. If you're hearing a sound in your head, you have to really kind of take a second and analyze what you're hearing and try to then find that sound. Like if I'm hearing the melody, and I'm not a great singer, but if I hear the melody like go up like, and hit that high note, I want it to shimmy a little bit. I want it to shake, So I kind of, I envision that. Right? I don't want... It just doesn't say enough for me. For me personally, the vibrato kind of allows me to, make the guitar scream, make the guitar cry a little bit. So with all those techniques being said, and there's a ton of more stuff that goes into classic rock. It's not just like these few simple little things, but this will get you started. There's a whole host of more topics and things we can talk about, but with the remaining time, or most of the remaining time, I want to give you guys the option to write any questions in. So like if there's anything you want to know right now, anything you want to talk about, question and answer time, we can begin. So feel free, type in all the questions you have, and I can address them one by one. I'll try to pick out some of the best ones, but as you're kind of thinking of your questions, you want to envision, like, who's your favorite guitar player, right? Favorite classic rock guitar player? Is it David Gilmour? Is it Jimi Hendrix? Is it, I mean, we didn't talk much about Hendrix. We didn't really have time to talk about too much of anybody. That would take hours and hours and hours. But when you're thinking about that, think about what it is that makes them stand out to you. You know, like try to, I know you can all hear one of their songs, your favorite solo, your favorite riff or whatever in your head. Try to like take a second now and analyze, listen in your head what that riff is or what that solo is or whatever, and try to put into words what it is that makes that stand out as opposed to another great guitar player. What is it that song or that riff does for you? Let me know that. I'm curious to know about that as well. But let's check on some of these questions here. All right. Do you have any pointers for doing vibrato on a bend? Yes, I do. Very, very good question. A lot of players struggle with this because when you do a bend, you know, it depends on your specific technique. But let's say you do a bend like this, right? And your thumb isn't quite wrapping over the top, but is maybe like, I don't know if you can see this, more back here on the guitar and less wrapped around the top, right? So you can kind of almost not see it, right? That is not the most effective way to do vibrato, because when you're doing vibrato, you need to have some leverage off the top of the guitar, because it's like squeezing. You're like squeezing the string closer to your thumb. So when I'm bending, I kind of push on this, I push downward on the neck in order to get enough leverage to push my fingers up. And once you can get that leverage, then what it takes is like really small, well, it depends on the vibrato. If you'd want to do like kind of shaky vibrato, what I'm doing is I'm releasing for just like a nanosecond, just the smallest increment possible. Like right there, you heard it, I just released it. You hear how it dropped a little? That's about as far as I go. So like, you know, like really small amount before I slam it right back up, and I do the upward bit just as quick as I release it. So it's like a really quick kind of like twitch muscle. And it's kind of hard to see. Let me see if I can get this hand a little closer here. So it's this like kind of like quick, kind of, it looks a little weird, but like if you're kind of like rapidly gripping something, you know, that's kind of the idea you want to have. And it takes a while, but it's best done with your fingers kind of not quite slammed together, but you don't want fingers like this. It's going to be a lot harder to move your fingers if they're spread apart, right? You want to have your fingers close together. And then wrapping this thumb around, even if you can't get it all the way around, if you can only get up here, that should be good too, you know? But getting some leverage off the top of the neck is really where you want to be to get your vibrato going. So, good question. Let's see if there's any others that came in. Anybody else want to know anything? All right. How do I reach for a purple haze type sound? Okay. Unfortunately, we didn't get to cover too much Hendrix, but I will right now. Jimi Hendrix had, you know, for his day, he had a rather complicated setup. He had a single coil guitar, which is huge if you're looking for that Hendrix sound, right? He had a Strat with single coil pickups, and it's going to sound completely different than a Les Paul. So give me 1 second. I got a Strat ready. Let me just switch over to it. Right here. All right. So the Strat will give it a much different sound. Right, the Strat has that single coil sound, and the way, I mean, Purple Haze has this huge crunch to it. There's a massive like, and the way he would get it is by using a fuzz pedal. So rather than your common distortion like this, that's kind of that, like I was talking, that creamy overdrive. He would use a fuzz, which is a super high gain, really hectic sound. And by getting that, or by, I guess, I want to say, using a fuzz pedal, listen to the difference in sound. And then there's that creamy one. With the fuzz, there's way more noise happening, and what that noise is there are overtones, harmonics that are happening above and over the note. And the thing with Hendrix, he had massive meaty hands, right? And he would use them like nobody's business. When he's playing vibrato, and he was a first finger player all the way, you know. You know, that kind of stuff is really Hendrixy, and getting that is kind of like, you know, like, let's try this out. All right. And so a lot of that comes with getting so comfortable with the guitar that you can fit in slides and all this noisy stuff that helps thicken up the sound through the fuzz pedal, because the fuzz pedal gives a bunch of noise, and it adds a lot of beefy low end and really high end and mid-range gain to the sound. So you get a fatter, beefier tone than you would with a normal distortion. So a fuzz pedal is key. And then fitting in all this kind of all that super crazy Hendrix stuff that he would do, that's all using the fuzz and just creating a massive wall of sound, really hectic and kind of almost psychotic, which was what made him so awesome, you know. But excellent question. Any others? Anybody else got something they want to know? Let's see here. Let's see. Lead pentatonics. When do you shift the root? Do you use the same minor pentatonic for 1, 4, and 5, or 1 and 4 and something else for 5? Okay, let me see if I get this right. When do you shift the root? Okay, I see what you're asking. Who is this here? Robert. Okay, Robert, good question. When you're dealing with pentatonic stuff and you're playing a blues, right? 1, 4, 5. You know, if you're right there. Okay, so we're in the key of E, E major, and then we're switching to an A, right? And then eventually we go to B. Right? If we're playing over a 1, 4, 5 progression, generally speaking, you got a couple options, and they're musical choices, right? So it's not necessarily like this is the rule and you have to do it this way. But one thing that really works well is if you're playing over major, right? We talked about this a little bit, maybe like 15 minutes ago. If you want to find the relative minor scale to use over that, then you basically just climb down 3 notes, right? But we can't do that on an open string, so let's go up to here. Right? So we climb down to C sharp, and we use the C sharp minor scale or minor pentatonic scale over an E major chord. So if you have this, let me actually just loop like a small 1, 4, 5 progression so you can hear what I'm talking about. So there's the loop, okay? Now, logic would say, okay, we're in the key of E, playing E minor pentatonic. But listen to what happens. You get that cream sound almost. It sounds like cream to me. It sounds like Clapton. But if you're looking for a different flavor, right, because it's got a very minor sound. You're playing minor notes over a major chord. You know, you got an E major chord with a G sharp in it, but you're playing over a G natural. So it clashes pretty often. But listen to the same thing if I use the C sharp minor scale. So you have a totally different feel, and it's got way more of that traditional blues feel. And that comes from playing the major pentatonic over that. And basically, I was just kind of burning through pentatonics. But what I would suggest is if you're playing over like an E7 to A7 to B7, right? A 1, 4, 5. You got musical choices. If you're looking for that traditional blues sound, play C sharp minor over the E and the A. You know, you can get a lot of mileage. And then when you get to the B, you can kind of switch within the same box to an F sharp minor scale, right? Right, and so you can generally use like pretty much everything in a C sharp minor scale. And that works really well if you just want to stay in one scale the whole time. The pentatonic thing, when you hit, if you're playing an E minor over E major, you're going to have to kind of make some slight adjustments to make sure that you're kind of hitting the right notes when you want, especially when you go to the A chord. That works, right, over A. But the E, you want to make sure that you're hinting at that G sharp. If you have to, that type of thing. So excellent question. And all around, I think we had some really cool, interesting ones. And a lot of people chimed in about the index finger, ring finger thing. So that's also a good concept to think about. But like I said, there's so much stuff happening with classic rock and the blues form that kind of gave birth to it, that it's just not enough time to talk about in 1 hour. So the thing I want to tell you guys is this DVD, and I want to pull up something here and give you a closer look at it. So bear with me just 1 second here. All right. So what we have basically is this Classic Rock Pro DVD set. And we're looking at 3 DVDs with over 4 hours of content just on these 3 DVDs. And you're really going to get a huge amount of stuff. Like the stuff we just talked about now is basically just kind of an appetizer of what's going to be in this DVD set. For example, we're going to talk about a way more in-depth version of pentatonics and blues scales and how they factor into playing. Like, Robert, your last question, the last one we talked about, we're going to cover that to a massive extent, to the point where you can kind of fluidly go in and out of pentatonic scales, change the root or not change the root, depending on what you're looking for. You know, it all depends on what sound you're after. As well as being able to take those players, those of you out there, who are mainly maybe chordal based, and you can play a ton of chords with no problem, but then lead stuff gets a little more difficult. You're gonna kind of get the answers you might be looking for, as well as for those guys who are like really into lead playing and want to learn how to tap and do Van Halen stuff and some like kind of shreddy type stuff. There's going to be a lot of that, and all of this will be kind of based around some really key players. Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix, Slash, Joe Perry, Tony Iommi. When Angus Young, when I think of classic rock, I think of these guys. So we're going to go through a bunch of their songs, some of their most famous stuff. Santana's another one. I can't believe I left him out, right? There's so much to talk about. There's an hour is just not enough. So you're going to get all of this kind of stuff, right? And you're going to be able to kind of, at the end of it, you're going to understand why Slash sounds like Slash and not Jimmy Page. If you put on the two guys, and you just take a 5-second clip, you're going to know almost instantly, if you're a guitar fan or a guitar player, you're going to know who's who. And that's kind of essential to finding your own style, like I was talking about with vibrato. So make sure that you pick out a couple of your favorites, because we're going to cover a ton of their stuff, and a lot of their songs and techniques as well. And in addition to these 3 DVDs, you're going to get a bonus disc that kind of sums it all up and gives some really maybe tougher, more challenging material to those who've made it through the DVD. That's when we're going to talk about some Van Halen stuff, some tapping, and a lot more shred stuff. Because when you think about classic rock, it spans from the 60s to the 80s. And so if you're looking at the 60s, nobody was shredding like Van Halen back then, right? They were playing like Clapton or Hendrix, right? Hendrix was maybe the craziest Van Halen of his day. So we're going to kind of span the decades, and by the time we end up at the bonus disc, you're going to have from the 60s to the 80s classic rock stuff pretty well in your pocket. Right now, for the first, you guys who are like watching this are the first people to kind of have any information or access to this DVD set. And so for the first 100 copies that you order, we're going to have a huge discount. It's going to be $67. And if you go to classicrockguitarpro.com/classicrockpro, if you go there, you'll be able to get this DVD set with the bonus. 4 discs with over 6 hours of content. And only the first 100 of you guys are going to get it at a discounted price, And if you think about it, like 6 hours, right? If you were going to take 6 one-hour guitar lessons, that would be like at least $300, if not more than $300. It's a ton of money, right? But at classicrockguitarpro.com/classicrockpro, you'll be able to get this whole DVD set for $67, nice and cheap, and you'll be able to have basically all that access, Slash, Jimmy Page, everyone else in your pocket at the end of it all. So make sure that you kind of gear up for the DVD, because there's, we kind of took it easy and we went over some like simplistic stuff here. But in the DVD set, it gets a little more in depth, actually a lot more in depth. And we cover a lot more techniques. So if you have any questions or anything, those will almost 100% guaranteed be answered in this DVD set. So head on over to classicrockguitarpro.com/classicrockpro and pick up one of the DVD sets, the Classic Rock Pro DVD, as soon as you can, because there's only 100 copies going. So if you guys have any questions about the DVD set or anything that you want to know that might be on there, type it into the box or into the comment section now and let me know, and I can answer anything you guys might be curious about on the DVD, because like I said, there's a ton of different techniques and styles and players that we're going to cover. So there's a lot of material. If you're curious about whatever's on there, shoot me a question right now, and I'll see what I got for you. All right, I got a question here from Thomas. Can you show us what the pentatonic scales are? The right ones when they're playing each chord shape, the caged chord shape, 7th and 9th chords. For example, which scale position goes best with an E-shaped bar chord? Okay, that actually will 100% be covered on the DVD set, because that's something that Hendrix is like really known for, and it goes back to what I was saying about the first finger technique, getting a bar chord and being able to make chords based off of that. Unfortunately, we didn't get to dive into the actual technique of how to do that, but we cover on the DVD set, there is Little Wing, the song Little Wing by Jimi Hendrix, and that is chock full of exactly what you're talking about, because he plays the chord and then he plays licks over it using the bar chord, or using the bar form of the chord that he's playing over at that moment. So check that out. Wait for that one on the DVD. That one will come up to you very shortly. But remember, first 100 copies get that discount. So anyway, those of you guys that are left, head on over to classicrockguitarpro.com/classicrockpro, because they're selling fast and the first 100 copies are at a big discount. So enjoy it. I hope you guys liked the little appetizer of classic rock stuff that you're getting. So check out the DVD for more info, and tune in next time.